My name is Shanna Osborne. I am the Care Coordinator for Owen County. And if you guys want to introduce yourself in the chat box, like your name, where you're from, your age, that way I can kind of get to know the audience. Being a care coordinator means that I connect people with substance use disorder to treatment or resources that they might need to get better. I've been doing this for a year. I work for Northern Kentucky University on a federal grant that focuses on how to address this opioid epidemic that we're in. So it's a pilot program, and we're kind of trying to do some innovative stuff through NKU's Innovative Health. It's been an interesting year. I am 36 years old. I have lived in Owen County since I was 5, from Southeast Kentucky. Before then, I graduated from Midway College, but I also went to Kentucky State University, Alice Lloyd College, and I'm a student at NKU. I have a background in nursing and in teaching. And the reason that substance use disorder is such an important part of my life is because my dad and my stepdad both suffered with substance use disorder. So I've kind of been in this field ever since I can remember as a child. And then I volunteer as the Drug Prevention Coalition. And I've been a volunteer there for over 10 years. And the industry, I guess we can call it, is ever changing and ever evolving. But my heart is with people who suffer from addiction or from substance use disorder. And that's what brings me to love my job and to want to help people who have been affected. So it's pretty likely that some of you have experience or know someone who has experience with addiction and with substance use disorder. And the more that we can talk about it and the more that we can learn about it, the more educated we are, and hopefully we can be preventative and proactive while also educating those around us and being mindful of what the disease of addiction actually entails. So addiction happens when a person becomes dependent on a substance. And I want to start talking about what types of substances do you think what types of substances do you think are addictive? Can any of you guys think of substances you think would be addictive? When you think of that, what do you think? And feel free to type in the chat, or if you want to speak out at any time, you certainly are welcome to do that. So some of the addictive substances that I know about are caffeine. You may have heard of caffeine. Some of you may drink or consume caffeine. And caffeine in energy drinks especially are very addictive. So good job, Bailey. Nicotine, pills, heroin, meth, she got them all. So 2 stars for Bailey. Caffeine can negatively affect us. It can affect our sleep, especially in teenagers. It can increase anxiety, and it is incredibly addictive. And if you are addicted to caffeine, like some of us are, and I'm addicted to Diet Mountain Dew, so I'm not judging, Carolyn, if you're drinking your coffee this late in the evening. But caffeine, if you're addicted to it and then you try to go a day without it, you probably are going to have a bad headache, probably going to be a little bit irritable, and that is called withdrawal. So when you become addicted to a substance, and then you do without it, that's called withdrawal. And some of us know about that with different substances. And then the more addictive substances that you can see on your screen, the harder it is, the worse the withdrawal is, and the harder it is to get away from it, and the harder it is to do without it. So one of the controversial things nobody put in the chat, and people try to argue that marijuana is not an addictive substance. However, there's lots of studies that are showing, especially recently, how marijuana is and can be an addictive substance for some people. So you've also probably heard, if you're a teenager, that marijuana is a gateway drug, and that people who have substance use disorder and have developed addiction to illegal drugs or harder drugs have usually also at one point done marijuana or tried marijuana. If you don't know what marijuana is, that's great. And I hope you never learn because it is an illegal substance, and, that's okay. But if you do have heard of what marijuana is an illegal substance that people use to get high, to get a buzz or a high feeling. And I want to point out to you that the marijuana of the 60s, and when people say marijuana, or you might have heard your parents or older siblings talk about marijuana, it's different. It was different in the 60s, or I don't know. Have any of you ever heard of Woodstock? You guys might be too young for that. I don't know. But the marijuana of Woodstock, which was the 60s, which was this big party with lots of rock and roll and music, it was a music festival. So Woodstock happened, and marijuana was a drug that was prevalent there. The marijuana of the 60s had about 1% THC, and THC is the drug that affects your hippocampus, which is the part of your brain that helps with memory. And basically, when THC gets in your brain, it slows the neurons. Your neurons fire slower, and so then it takes a longer time developing memories, and especially in your teen brain that's developing so much faster. It's critical that you don't mess up your brain at a young age, right? Your teenage brain is very easily harmed permanently, okay? So what I want to bring to your attention is that where marijuana of the 60s had 1% THC, the average homegrown joint today contains more than 15% THC. So what you're getting today in the amount of THC is a lot more potent and has a more harmful effects on your brain than that of marijuana that might have been from your parents' generation or things that you may have heard about. It's a lot less safe today. If you've ever heard of dabs or waxes, they can be more than 80% THC. And nowadays in the high schools, kids are experimenting with vapes a lot. And when you're vaping, you really don't know what's in there, probably nicotine, but it's possible that there's a dab or a wax or some type of vape that is laced or has parts of THC. So it's incredibly dangerous. And I want to warn you, and I want you to be aware about how marijuana and nicotine and other substances can affect your brain. I know that you've probably heard just say no, and you've probably heard, this is your brain on drugs, don't do that. But I need you to understand that the teenage brain is wired differently than an adult brain. You guys, your brain can respond and adapt to its environment a lot faster, and you can respond more quickly, which also makes you more impulsive and at risk of taking behavior. You think you're invincible, basically. And I get that because that's what science proves. And I was a teenager many, many moons ago, but you're not invincible. And some of the choices that you make today are going to affect your brain and your cells futuristically and forever. So I need you to try to be aware and share with your friends the education on what the actual repercussions are going to be when you try those types of illegal drugs or even legal drugs. So I want to talk about what causes people to misuse substances. Pain, physical pain. Maybe you have a toothache. Maybe you have to have a surgery. You have to get your teeth removed, or maybe you play sports and you pulled a muscle, and you are prescribed a medication, and then you like it, or you become addicted to it. You become dependent on it to relieve the pain. A lot of times people misuse substances because of emotional stress. Sometimes it's trauma or unhealthy relationships. Maybe it's a psychological thing. You feel inadequate. You're trying to boost your self-esteem. Sometimes people misuse substances to fit in. Maybe you're just curious, or it's an experiment, or there's peer pressure, or you're bored, or you're rebelling against your parents. Or maybe there's you're an academic and there's lots of school pressure. So you might try to take some kind of speed substance to help you stay up all night or focus more. Or maybe it's just the instant gratification of it. Some people misuse substances because they're easily accessible. Or maybe in a lot of cases, especially during this pandemic, isolation is a huge cause for substance misuse. And then I want to talk a little bit about mental illness. So the disease of addiction is often accompanied by a mental disorder. And those are called co-occurring disorders. If you have substance use disorder with a mental disorder, some of those include depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar. And there are some children and adolescents and teens that are diagnosed and medicated for some of these disorders. Sometimes you can outgrow them, and sometimes they're lifelong. But when you're trying to find a substance to treat your disorder, to treat a mental health disorder, it's very often that those substances you become dependent upon them, and then you're led to misuse them. And that's the root of a lot of substance use disorders. I'm just going to share with you that I have over 200 clients in Owen County, and I've had a lot of friends die from overdose and from different related diseases that has to do with addiction. And so the co-occurring disorders are serious. Now, when we talked about isolation, we talked about the pandemic, humans are social creatures, right? Aristotle was a famous Greek philosopher, and he said, man is by nature a social animal. And even more intelligent than Aristotle, like in Genesis, God said, it is not good for man to be alone. So we are created to be social creatures, and you guys probably better than me understand social media, social TikToks, and your social presence is probably on a level beyond my comprehension, because when I grew up, we didn't even have cell phones, because I'm old. It's important that I think we understand that we are social beings, and we were created for social interaction, and we long for that. And so part of substance use and the drive to fill that void is when people seek out substances. And that's not a healthy coping skill. That's not a healthy way to deal with things, but that is the reality of what happens. So I thought this study was really cool. And I'll pull it up for you real quick, just so you know, like what I'm referencing if I want to research it further. But the National Institute on Drug Abuse, rats prefer social interaction to heroin or meth. Isn't that kind of crazy? But in reality, what happened was a bunch of scientists, really smart people, got together, and they got a bunch of rats addicted to heroin and meth. And the way they did that is, if you look at group A, and the image that I have, which is just like they isolated these rats and they gave them a choice of water or drugs, so or meth. And the isolated rats that were just in the cage by themselves, they always, almost always, like 99% of the time, chose the drug and became addicted to the drug. And then the scientists started thinking, well, there's nothing else for them to do. So then in group B, if you look, they built a rat park. So they built a rat community. And they gave the rats, there was lots of, my internet okay? I just got a message. Okay. They built a rat park and they gave the rats all the cool toys and all the good food and, you know, everything cool that the rats would need. But they also offered the water versus the drug infused water. And 90% of the time in the rat park, rats chose the regular water. They didn't choose the water that was laced with meth and heroin. Now take that a step further, and they created an isolation tank with the rat and gave the rat two options. So the rats could hit one lever to get an injection of drugs to have heroin or meth, or the rat could hit the other lever and a door opened and they had another rat. So they literally could go and socialize. They could have a peer, they could have a friend, and those were their two choices. 90% of the time, the rats chose to socialize with the peer over getting the injection of drugs. Even they took it to another level and they had these rats that they injected with these drugs over the course of like 40 days. So they were good and addicted, right? They increased their dosages and got them good and addicted to drugs, and then gave them the choice between socialization and the drugs. And even through withdrawal, the rats chose to hang out with their peer and chose that lever over their drugs. So that tells me, I don't know, that was a huge study. And then when the social choice wasn't there, so when they took away the social choice, the rats always referred back to the drug. So for me, that was a pretty cool study and pretty huge. What does that say to you? Did anybody think that was also interesting? And what does that say to you about drug misuse?
You all can also unmute yourself, or you can type in the chat.
So I want to talk a little bit about stigma when it comes to substance use and people with substance use disorder. What are some things that you guys think of? Do you know what a stigma is? Can anyone say? So a stigma is a discrimination against an identifiable group of people. Stigmas about people with substance use disorder might include like inaccurate thoughts, like they're dangerous, or they're all thieves, or they're liars, or they're incapable of managing treatment, or it's their fault, they made bad choices. Those are some stigmas that are associated with people who have substance use disorder. And with stigma, which is any time that you discriminate against a group of people, causes negative repercussions, especially socially. So when people with substance use disorder are rejected, usually because of violations of social norms, so maybe they have lied or stolen or acted inappropriately because they were under the influence of a substance, they violate the social norms, and so they become rejected by their friends and their peers. And that creates a reluctance for them to seek treatment. Sometimes healthcare professionals treat and mistreat people with substance use disorder. And then the cycle exacerbates the social alienation that happens when they're not being treated. So it's a cycle. So one of the things that we have to do in order to break that stigma and help defeat the cycle is to educate ourselves about addiction and about substance use disorder, and being able to help people that we know, our loved ones who may be addicted or may become addicted or may be thinking about trying some of these addictive substances for the first time. And you've heard me, so language matters. When we're talking about substance use and we're talking about substance use disorder, language matters. And so I don't want you've heard me say substance use disorder, which means someone who is addicted to drugs. And the important thing when talking about people with substance use disorder is that you don't use any labels that turn people into things. And this is a good lesson all throughout life. If you have a friend or you know of a person who has a disability, you don't want to call them disabled. You don't want to say he's disabled. He's not disabled. He's a person with a disability. So does that make sense? How that solidifies that person is a person first who has a disability, or and so you want to use inclusive language, like misuse versus abuse. When I say substance misuse versus saying substance abuse, it gives you a different tone. Very good, Bailey. Yes, you're exactly right. And that causes, when that person feels that way, that usually causes them to relapse or stay in that cycle of addiction and not to seek help or seek treatment. So it's very important that we address the stigmas, we address the thoughts, and we can start by using proper language, by using language that is inclusive and not so negative. So instead of saying the word addict, if we say person with substance use disorder, that creates a whole different ball game when it comes to us trying to understand. And that's okay, Bailey. We understand. Again, former or reformed addict is not good terminology. If you can say person in long-term recovery or person in recovery, that those types of languages help. So if we're careful about how we talk about people and how we talk about substance use disorder, and we really treat it like the disease that it is, maybe initially some people who have developed a substance use disorder, they might have started out with a bad choice. They might have started out choosing to misuse a substance, but it's very quickly that people can become dependent on those substances, and then they don't really have much of a choice. It's like that or being sick. And in order to treat the disease, we have to treat it like a disease, and we have to be vigilant in helping people understand and seek treatment for recovery. So if you know someone or you have friends who you think might have a substance use disorder or be on the verge of becoming addicted to a substance, there's lots of resources out there. Got a list of resources here. Wanted to share the smell slide that'll help you guys to determine when you're trying to determine what good information is. When you're navigating all the web, the World Wide Web, and when you're navigating social media, it's so important that you understand and try to get the source of your information, like consider the source and not just trust just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true. You guys have a lot of discernment that you have to do being teenagers and being able to navigate what's truth versus what's not. And I know that's hard. And then these are some additional resources that we have in terms of the Brook is a great resource for people, or if you have friends that have mental health disorders, because they're often accompanied by substance use, but maybe not always. So I have tons of resources. I am in Owen County, And I have lots of resources in Owen County. But if you're not in Owen County, I can certainly find resources for you in other parts of Kentucky and the state. And I'm noticing, Andrea, you're from Newport. So that's excellent. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, comments? Maybe you have some thoughts on the subject?
Just a reminder, you can unmute yourselves to ask questions. You can ask specifically about the presentation. You could also ask about Shanna's career and how she got to where she is, different education backgrounds and things like that. So it's really up to you. My dogs want to try and ask some questions. They are invading my personal space. All right, we've got a question. It's coming through. Do you see that?
Is it true that drugs can be found in everyday products? Yes, Andrea, absolutely. Caffeine is considered a drug. So that's something that, is also chocolate contains cocoa, which it can be considered an addictive drug as well. So definitely drugs, the term drug is a broad statement. I'm wondering, Andrea, if you're referring to maybe household cleaning products and things like that, because sometimes kids and teenagers misuse and abuse substances that are like in household cleaning products. So there are ways, huffing and different experiments that kids think might be fun at the time, which are not. They're highly dangerous and can be lethal. I mean, I've known teenagers that died from trying to huff household products. So I'm not sure if you're talking in that area or, just regular drugs like in soda. Both are drugs. Drugs are a broad term.
We also did a field trip a little while ago with one of our neuroscientists on campus who specializes in toxicology, and talks a little bit about everyday products and even things like vitamins or whatnot that can be toxic to your system. And they're not necessarily drugs, but they're dangers that can be found in a lot of different things. Like some spices. I was amazed. It was really interesting.
Right.
Do we have any other questions? So there's one question that I always like to ask folks when we have our programs. With your educational background, where do you get to, where would you be able to travel to? Like, where would you be able to work overall?
Oh, with my background?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, goodness. So I have a pretty broad variety of, I've been a teacher, so I taught alternative school for middle school and high school kids for 2 years. I went to nursing school, and so I worked in an acute care hospital for 2 years. And I managed a winery for 7 years, so I also have a business degree. I worked in a call center, which was called Azadart. So we managed like 7 websites and was able to manage 40 temps and 7 full-time employees while we updated websites. And in this field, I think now at this point in my life, God's kind of leading my path to do more social work, which I dabbled in right out of high school, and then decided not to pursue social work because of a lot of red tape. But I love what I'm doing right now. And if God leads me down that path, I want to keep going that way. As far as being able to provide advice to teenagers about what to do if you want to be in a career like mine, I would definitely recommend that you work in the field first to decide what type of education you need. So one of my mistakes was I went right out of high school and into college without a clue of what I wanted to do. So I ended up with several degrees and hundreds of credit hours, and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I've had a lot of different careers and a lot of different experiences, which ultimately has prepared me for what I'm doing right now, because I can relate to people of different walks of life, and my personal experience helps me understand people that are suffering. One of the things that I wish that I could do is help more with the mental health aspect of it. So I get caught up because I don't have a PhD or letters behind my name that help me to help people with the mental health aspect of it. And we don't have enough of those in this industry. We don't have enough counselors and enough psychologists, psychiatrists that can prescribe medication for dual diagnosis. We're desperate in this field for people that can help provide that service that I can't provide. And so that's sad when I have clients that really need they need counseling and therapy and medication to help them sustain. And you can't find that anywhere.
And I think that even if you do go straight into college, which, at NKU, we would love you to go to college. There are so many really awesome opportunities, I think, nowadays where, do internships, try a lot of different classes. Don't be afraid to be an undecided major. NKU has some really great advising, especially. And we even have some cool programs that are like interdisciplinary, which means you don't have to stick with, one specific major. You could make up your own major, which is really neat. So there are a lot of different ways, and one thing, especially if you're interested in like the health field, I hear from all of our nursing staff is like, before you get to college, do some shadowing, at least have seen blood, make sure you don't faint, when you're doing your rounds and whatnot, because it's so much better to kind of figure some of those things out before you get sort of streamlined into a major. College can be a really great place for self-discovery.
Do any of you have any idea what you want to be or what you want to look for when you maybe get older? I know you guys are still young.
It's okay not to know. I told everyone I wanted to be president, and now my entire family still thinks I want to be president. And that was the dream I had when I was 16. So it's okay.
Right.
Oh, pediatric surgeon.
That's specific. Awesome.
And one of the cool things about healthcare is that you're going to work with so many different people. So you might work with someone like Shanna who does this kind of work. You might work with a radiologist who have been some of our previous presenters. You might work with researchers who are studying a new drug. So there are so many different connections to find. All right, I'm gonna open it up for one last question since everybody's been so quiet.
Heather wants to be a political scientist or a doctor. That's really cool also.
You can do both.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who've run for office who are doctors.
Right.
None of them represent our state.